Hello, this is Dr. Mercola, and today we're here to talk about a topic that many people in natural medicine are aware of and personally use, and that's saunas. And here today, joining me to elaborate on this topic is Steve Benda, who is has training in power systems, in nuclear engineering. So, Steve, welcome to our studio, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And I'm wondering if you can tell our viewers how you first became interested in this topic and how your journey was that led you to the position you are now.
Well, the saunas in my heritage, I'm a Finnish and German background, and it seems like every Finnish home has a sauna in it in some degree, and ranging
So just about everyone?
Yeah, everyone. I think
Interesting.
it's very interesting. The tradition is that the sauna gets built oftentimes before the home, and in light of that, I've been raised with saunas since I was a small child. And
were you born in Finland?
No, I wasn't. I was. My mother was from a Finnish heritage, and her mom and dad were directly from Finland.
Okay.
And so the saunas were always in my family, and they became part of our life. And so that, I guess, spawned an early interest. And now with the advent of some of the newer technology, like the infrared saunas or the traditional type saunas, where electrical energy provides the heating mechanism, these become more and more available to the common user in their homes.
Can you expand on the use of saunas historically? Obviously, you mentioned it's common in Finland. In my experience, common in many Eastern European countries and many Asian countries. And how far back does it go? And do you have any perspective on, when it started and then how it became widely adopted within the culture?
Well, I can't speak as an expert for when the days were of the early days, but some of the old Finnish saunas were building fires under piles of rocks, and then inside of a room that was very smoky, and then the people would come into those rooms and throw water on that pile of rocks and get the steam heat in the room and sweat. And sweating was a mechanism that I would say is a very common attribute of saunas. It evolved into contained wood stoves, where the wood stove would heat the pile of rocks, and more of a contained smoke, being that they'd have chimneys. And then the same water on the rocks, sit in the room and experience a sweaty, very warm environment. And that evolved into electrical saunas, which are more traditional now, where the electric heating elements will heat the rocks in a small stove, and very typically found in basements or little rec centers in homes, and lots of clinics. And they, again, the same thing: heat, throw water on the rocks, and the bather will experience the warm heats of the steam, and their body will sweat, and I'll say profusely, but what a great experience. And that then has led to more recent years, and probably 10 or 15 years ago, the evolution of the infrared sauna, which is a different kind of heating mechanism that relies on the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum to provide heat and radiation, radiant heat.
So it's really an important innovation and evolution of the technology, because certainly, the basic goal is to generate heat, and you can generate heat from burning wood, but the problem with burning wood in a confined space, of course, is that there's toxic byproducts like carbon monoxide and smoke, which are not very good for your health. The sweating may be, but certainly the toxic byproducts are not. So it's nice to have an alternative strategy, and certainly using the rocks as a way to capture and store that energy and then transfer it is certainly useful. So basically we have evolved now to the point where we have two safe ways to heat the internal environment of the sauna, which would be the traditional, is that classically called the Finnish sauna?
I would call it Finnish. I would traditional Finnish, which would be the electrical heat. Yes.
Okay, it's electrical heat, and then we have the newer, more 21st century versions, which would be the infrared sauna. So I'm going to wonder if you can discuss the traditional saunas first, maybe the type of heating elements they're doing, and then the difference between the wet and the dry, and then we can go and discuss the infrared.
Absolutely. The traditional, which is very typical, found, it's not a very big stove, but it has radiant heat elements, which are resistive elements that will heat when current flows through. That they'll heat up under the rocks. The rocks will become warm from that. The room will be regulated by a thermostat. And that the bather will go in, and initially the room will feel dry and warm, comfortably warm, and you'll throw water on the rocks, which will then release an explosion. I'll call it a fun explosion of steam heat, where that instant, that moment when it goes from dry to more of a humid environment, thousands of pores are popping at the same time on your body, and it feels really, really nice as your sweat mechanisms turn on. And that's a traditional sauna, that we throw water on the rocks, we get the steam heat in the room, and we experience a lot of sweating.
That would be considered a wet sauna.
That'd be considered a wet sauna. And what typically happens is you'll go in, take a few ladles of water on the rocks and experience the steam blast and enjoy the warm, sweaty heat, and then maybe you go into a cool down mode after that in the changing room, and then probably shower. And I'll say it's the best recipe for ready to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
When you lay down to go to sleep that night, you're very, very relaxed and clean from the sauna.
Yeah, skin is silky smooth.
Oh, it is so wonderful, and being that that's such a nice way to close the day out, like my sauna at home is heated every night, my traditional in the basement.
So I'm wondering if you can describe your transition into your current position, which is with a company that, as I understand, is the largest producer of saunas in the world.
Yes, I being that my background in nuclear power deals with radiation, deals with power systems, deals with the control of certain electrical properties. The gentleman asked me to be involved with some development, and in doing so applied some of those theories and processes to the infrared sauna rooms. And right now we have effectively built some of the first low electromagnetic radiation rooms, as well as the first low electrical field rooms. And both and I'll speak to that a little bit, that electromagnetic fields, which are all about electrical energy, are a form of I'll call it like the force components that come off of electrical energy. The force equations are set up where electrical fields are everywhere around us. If there's energized wires, electrical fields are around us. And
well, potentially, because the electrical fields can be fairly easily mitigated.
They can be, absolutely.
Yeah, so, but it certainly is a potential. And for most of us, we are exposed to them.
We are, and being that they can be mitigated through shielding, electrical fields are probably one of the areas that we can easily contain. But the other component that's in the electrical field is the electromagnetic radiation
EMF
piece.
field.
EMF.
The M for the EMF is magnetic, which
Yes, it is.
Which is the bugger. That's the tough one.
Yeah, but actually, when you think about it, both are very bad actors, I'll say, because they act on our bodies. Our bodies are filled with charged particles. We're made up of charged particles, and an electrical field will act with a force on those charged particles, depending on its magnitude, and over time may alter the way that our bodies behave cellularly.
Well, because many people don't realize that we are fundamentally electrical beings.
We are.
That's the way our cells communicate. They communicate electrically. And if we're exposed to some external field, that could interfere with that cellular communication and wreak havoc with our system.
It sure can, and you're probably closer to those physical effects than I am, but from the electrical side, I know that if I have an energized source, which is an EMF, which is electromotive force, volts, we all know volts, that's generating or emitting an electric field. We measure that by volts per distance, and that's what our meter will tell us. But the other part of that force equation would be the electromagnetic part, which is when a charged particle moves in the wire, meaning now current, so volts and current, that it'll generate a magnetic field around the wire, and that magnetic field will also impart a force on those same charged particles in our body. So when there's an electromagnetic field present, then possibly an electromagnetic field will be present if there's a current flow. And in both cases, we've developed some technology that we can effectively mitigate or eliminate the electric field piece, and we have technology that will mitigate or minimize below acceptable standards the electromagnetic piece.
Well, thank you for setting that frame and that perspective, because it is an issue. As I mentioned, when I first started doing saunas, it was about 15 years ago, and the first generation saunas, and I believe now these panels that are being used to generate that infrared heat initially were carbon, or I think ceramic, and then it progressed to carbon, or is it the converse?
I think you're right. It started ceramic which were much hotter.
Yeah, progressed. So the first one, I had one of the first ones, so it was a ceramic, and the newest one, of course, are the carbons. But the ceramic were relatively safe, but as they progressed to the carbons, my understanding is that the initial technology, the second, third, and fourth generations, actually were very high in EMFs.
Hmm.
And so essentially, almost any sauna that was made in the late 90s to just recently is likely infrared sauna, is going to be high in EMFs. And there's a very simple way to test for this. It's not like something you have to call the manufacturer. You could just get an EMF meter, and you could pick up ones. You can get an electrical meter for like $10, or a more sophisticated EMF one for maybe 100 or 150, like a tri-field, and actually measure these yourself. I mean,
Yes,
you don't need someone to tell you. You can see exactly where it's coming from, where it's hot. I mean, one of the ones I recently looked at, just within the last few weeks, I mean, it was off the chart. Even outside the sauna, 120.
Yeah.
And I mean, normally it should be below 3. I think it's microgauss?
It's, yeah, milligauss.
Milligauss, sorry,
Yes.
milligauss. So 3 milligauss, and this was 120. So wasn't because these fields weren't mitigated because of the way they constructed. So I'm wondering if you could comment on what I just said, and then what changes you made in your newest technologies of infrared saunas.
Well, if I walked around the room in here with a milligauss meter, that I could go to cords, electrical cords, lamps, whatever the case may be, and I could find hot spots, and hot spots would be ranges of 100, 200, 300 milligauss. I'd call those hot. However, the interesting thing on that radiation piece is that as you move away from the source, the measured field drops off by 1 over the distance squared. So it drops off relatively quickly. However, we don't have the luxury when we're sitting in one of these rooms to position ourselves just right, to be just far enough away. We go in there.
It's virtually impossible to be less than a foot or two away from the source.
Yeah, you'll go in and most likely I'll be leaning against the source, my body. You're a little bit further away, so you'd be, if I metered where you sit, would be less than mine, but
not much.
Not much, but nonetheless, that when there is an electric field and there's an electric current flow, we will be generating electromagnetic radiation, EMR. And being that electric fields and electromagnetic radiation fields are vector, meaning that they have a direction and they have a magnitude. Any combination of an electric field plus an electric field plus other components that add up will end up to be the resultant of the many, not just one. And so what happens is if we don't effectively control all the sources of the electric field or all the sources of the electromagnetic radiation, we aren't really taking care of the problem. And so the technologies we've developed are that we can effectively eliminate all the induced electromagnetic or electric fields in the room so that the entire environment is below our acceptable standards. And we've also created the technologies to mitigate through some of the configurations we've used on the magnetic portion.
Can you just touch on how you've mitigated against the electrical fields and adopted technology within your saunas to essentially eliminate the electric fields?
The electric fields are more, we can shield on those. That we can.
And how do you shield?
We have effective materials for shielding, and we've taken great care.
Would there be things like conduit or?
Actually, we've gone to some patented technology that we've developed on ways to shield our power sources. Through probably a year's worth of work and testing, we've taken care of what we think to be all the different areas in the room that will have electrical sourcing.
Okay. So essentially, it's some type of shielding.
It's a type of shielding. Yeah.
Okay.
Electric fields are effectively reduced by shielding. Magnetic fields, on
or they
the
can
other,
counter each other out too, can't they?
electric fields are, well, the answer would be yes if you could layer them and line them up properly, because they are vector, meaning that they're directional. However, when you're running power wires through different areas in the room, to do that would be probably impossible.
Okay.
Being that, well, I'll just say it'd be impossible based on a power feed being 2-wire.
Okay.
On the other hand, the magnetic fields are induced by current flow in that same conductor, and we have ways that we can cancel the magnetic fields. So again, being that they're vector, meaning length and direction, we have effectively placed our power conduiting systems in a way that will provide a vector cancellation.
Okay, so, and this takes some extra time, effort, and energy and resources to construct a sauna this way, right?
Well, actually, not to construct it, but what we took all those energies and time and resources to develop it.
Okay.
So now
putting it together.
Putting it together is the same as the other.
There's no special changes to the wiring or the shielding or
no,
same issue.
Actually, some of our goals here were to make the installation easier, and we have accomplished that as well.
Okay, great. So, but in your experience, I mean, there's a number of sauna companies out there. Maybe you can compare your company that you work with some of the other sauna companies. And have you seen any other companies that really have even thought to address this issue?
There's some out there that are addressing it, and being that I'm very electrically oriented, to hear their presentations about chemical processes and things that they're using to minimize the electromagnetic radiation, it's either way beyond me or it's just not true. And I happen to believe that it's just not true because of my experience with the electrical fields.
And this is relatively easy to measure. It's not like rocket science. I mean, you can almost take any grade school child and give them a meter, and you can check and see if the fields are there or not.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
You know, so I mean, developing and designing systems to mitigate against that is certainly a challenge and requires professional expertise like yourself. But to actually measure that is a pretty simple process.
Yeah, it is very simple. You could give the child the meter and tell them to interrogate the room.
Right.
And put the meter on the wall and flow the wall and see what they come back with. And
so I think, you know, I'd like to have people understand as a result of this interview is that there is indeed sort of a public health warning that people do use saunas for relaxation, as you mentioned, but many people, perhaps in my experience, even more, uses saunas for health benefits,
Absolutely.
for detoxification and things like that. So if they're doing that, it would seem counterproductive to employ a device that is actually aiding one aspect of their health but hurting them in another.
I would agree.
So it's kind of like driving down the road with your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. It's not an efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say which, I mean, you might get benefit, it may actually make you worse depending on your specific individuality.
Well, you know, again, I look at this force equation, which is the total net force, and this is force on our cellular body, is the net force is an electric field force, the static, that's the volts part, plus the magnetic part, which is the two very distinct components in that equation, and to address only one of them, and assuming that only one exists, such as the magnetic part can never exist without the electric field part. The electric field, I use it as like a water analogy, where if you had a garden hose and you had a water source and you saw a pressure gauge, the pressure is volts in the electric analogy, and when you turn it on, the flow of the water is the current in the electric analogy. And so you can't have current flowing without volts, the electric portion. And so to address only one and assume only one exists is missing half of the equation. And if we're truly addressing all aspects of the electric field, the electromagnetic field, we need to effectively address both. Interesting, Doctor, the standard that we use as our target is one that has developed in Sweden, which has effectively been called the Swedish standard, the electromagnetic Swedish standard, where you can visualize how it was born, in that a computer monitor would be in front of a person, and that computer monitor would be a certain distance realistically from that person, and that they've developed a standard where at 30 or 50 centimeters from that screen there would be a certain amount of milligauss reading, or a maximum electric field. And so what we've done, based on that study and the credibility of that study, is we've said, okay, let's take that same benchmark, that same standard, and apply that to our saunas. Here's what we have to make the assumption. We don't care really what distance it is that they're measuring. We care about what the milligauss reading is that they set as their maximum benchmark. And so what we've done is we've said, okay, let's take that Swedish standard and apply that to everywhere in the room that part of a human body could realistically exist. Your back, your foot, your legs, wherever that may be. And we've taken that standard to be our maximum acceptance.
And what was the standard again?
The standard currently is 2.0 milligauss at 30 centimeters. But again, I don't care about the distance. I care about the number.
Yeah, where your body is.
Exactly.
Exposure. If your head's going to be there, your hand, your foot.
Absolutely. And then I've also taken the Swedish number of 10 volts per meter as the electric field piece. And so wherever you interrogate that room, those are the numbers that we've used as the acceptance. And the interesting part about the Swedish standard is that's the 2.0 milligauss is the number that would be added milligauss reading to that of background. So if I took my meter, I have to make this assumption that the meter is going to automatically have background, which my experience is 0.4 to 0.6 in an area that's generally EMR.
If I can interject here, that's a pretty clean area.
That is clean. Yes.
More than likely, most people watching this, the vast majority, I would guess, live in environments that are beyond that, 2 to 3.
Absolutely.
In fact, if they're under 3, they're doing pretty good.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah, so, but your point is that you have to add the background radiation on top of this. So before you would turn whatever you're measuring, whatever it is, you have to make sure it's off, measure all around it so you understand what the background is, then turn it on, and then the difference is what the actual amount is coming out of it. But you still are concerned. It's sort of a moot issue because it's a fine point, because you really, bottom line is, you still want it down to below 2.5 no matter what's contributing to it.
That's right.
Background
That's right.
or a new addition.
Based on that, the science that went into the Swedish standard, and we do use that as our benchmark. And we find that here's kind of an interesting event that I see in our testing. But when we test and someone will say, "Oh, I've got high readings," the first thing that I'll do is take my meter and I'll walk around the external environment and see what the ambient is. And oftentimes what happens is somebody has laid a power cord near the test room, or something changed in the environment to make a high environmental EMF. And you eliminate those external sources and isolate just the room. That's what we're really looking at, is the isolated room. And the sciences that we've added to the room and the design attributes have really brought all aspects of that room under good control.
Well, I'm glad you have, because it really is an important detail, and the devil is a detail in many areas of life, certainly here.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would encourage the viewers to do is actually get an EMF meter. I happen to personally like the Trifield. I've used them for 15 years or so. There are others. There are certainly less expensive ones and more expensive ones, but it's, you know, you get one that works, that you can trust, and measure it regularly. Interestingly, just last night, I was using a device that I was concerned about had some EMFs. So I grabbed my meter and measured it, and it was actually okay. But what kind of shocked me is that my ambient radiation in my bedroom had gone up. I measured it like when I first moved in several years ago. It was really low. In fact, I had one of the president of biobiology in North America come out and measure it, and got it passed with flying colors. But now it was like up to 5 or 6 milligauss, not too far from where I was sleeping, which shocked me. But on the other side of the bed, it was low. So I still have to figure out what that is. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that my new strategy now is I'm always going to travel with my EMF meter, because when you're traveling in a hotel or something, a lot of times all you have to do is move. Sometimes you won't be able to, but move the headboard out, or sleep on one side or the other of the bed, or change rooms, because you never know what's going on. The only way to know is to measure it. And fortunately, these things are very simple. They typically require a 9-volt battery, you know, that lasts for years, and as long as you turn it off. And you know, it's easy to measure. As I said, a grade school child can do it. And you really want to minimize your exposure, because these exposures are not going to hurt you in the short term. There's just no question. You know, it's kind of like smoking. You can smoke a pack of cigarettes, you're not going to die from it. But it's what you do over the long term, these exposure to these chronic exposure to these fields, that can have really very significant adverse consequences on your biology.
You know, in my nuclear background, we dealt with 3 aspects, and I've added a 4th, but we deal with time, distance, and shielding, and apply those same things to our infrared rooms. Well, you say time, can't really fuss with that too much, because the user is going to use it for as long as they feel. But the distance piece, yes, you can. We try to find ways to maximize our distance. Remember, it drops off at 1 over the r squared, so we can, distance is most definitely in our favor. And then the shielding piece, of course, we can shield where we can, or we can mitigate by cancellation and other techniques. But then the other is my mitigation, is where I look at ways that, in combination of different things, I can take and minimize the fields, because again, I think of all these little EMF and EF generators as all these little magnitude and directional additives, and that every piece is adding to some meter reading somewhere. And if I can configure and lay out the room properly, that I can deal with reducing the pieces by, in essence, minimizing the net effect.
So thank you for describing the details of the EMF process and how you reduce it in the saunas. I'm wondering if you could address some of the other areas of building a sauna, because obviously the power supply is only one, and how your company might differ from some of the other companies, being it's the largest and one of the oldest, I would imagine.
Well, they're a very seasoned company, and they've dealt
can you go into
for many
detail,
years.
what factors make it different, distinguish it from other companies, and maybe even comment on the types of materials you use?
Well, the company in itself is very well heeled in regards to the culture, in regards to the technologies that exist in the different sauna type rooms, and they're also I'd call them a leader in innovation. We have not only gone and solved many of these little problems, but we're building a good intellectual base as we're moving forward. That some of the discoveries are, you know, again, we're not generating the new wheel, but we're generating some techniques of existing pieces, bringing those together to effectively achieve the results that we want. And So we're very innovative. We protect by patents, and we are looking past this generation to the next version of this that will have more whistles, more buzzers, more sizzle to it in terms of its technology. We are also the first to truly effectively deal with redefining the infrared on signature that we have turned from the typical 50% on infrared signature to one that's about 96% on.
Oh, can you elaborate on that more?
What it is that when an infrared room nears the set point, the thermostat, 150 degree F setting, let's say, that it begins to cycle on and off based on the controls and the set points. We've done some very interesting high performance aspects that will more effectively keep the infrared signal on 96% of the time versus only 50%. And to the bather, that means a lot, because the bather is going to feel, they'll feel warmed, and they'll feel like they're in an experience when the infrared is on. Again, the heat signature coming from the electrical energization. Whereas if the room is turned off, their bodies will start to feel cooler almost instantaneously.
Well, if the temperature is still 120 or 150, it's not going to be that quickly.
It will be very quickly. Very interesting. What
Right.
happens is, as soon as the infrared turns off, their body starts to cool down based on not getting that heat signature from the infrared ray. I've seen some companies and some people, to keep the infrared signal on, they'll open the door so that the thermostat is sitting there thinking, I got to be turned on, so I'm going to stay on, yet the room is cooling down. And to the bather, they feel like they're exposed in the nice warm radiant heat.
Are there any other aspects you wanted to comment?
Well, I guess those are some big items in terms of our IR engine. And what's nice about it is we truly believe that we're the first on some of the little intricate details on making these pieces come together, the IP associated with it.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate all your time, effort, and energy to help produce a useful device
Thank
to
you.
help us reach our goals and take control of our health.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.